Welcome back to the Heal with Gold show. I'm excited to bring you Julie Kuznets. Julie and I know each other for probably 30 years because we knew each other when I lived in Highland Park, New Jersey, before I moved to Florida. And our kids used to play together as babies. I knew a little bit, I knew somewhat part of her story, but I didn't know to the extent of the adversities and the challenges that Julie had to face. So when she volunteered to come to the show, I was happy and I was impressed. I was impressed because for her to be here with us, she needs to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. She actually woke up earlier because she did reach out to me when it was 3 o'clock in the morning in Israel. And I think that this is what I always talk about when people go through things and they want to use their messes as a message. They want to use their situation, their struggles for a purpose to help somebody else. So she's here, she's has nothing to gain, she in a way, right? She's just here to share her stories. But what she has to gain is the hope that she's going to inspire somebody else who's going through a difficult time, if it is from health, if it's losses, if it is disappointments, whatever it is, to find their inner strength to overcome. Hi, Marina. I see your name. Yes, when you come in, say hi. If you approved StreamYard, I'll be able to see your name. Otherwise, please tell me your name so I know who you are. But she's here because she wants to inspire and help other people to get out of that victim place of why did this happen to me? Why so many things happen to me? That is not to say that there isn't pain and there isn't crying and there isn't moments of depression and there isn't moments of PTSD. Hi, Regina. By the way, I do see your name, and welcome. So I'm going to bring her back because I want to start right away. I want to share her story. She's the one who needs to tell it. Share, okay? Do watch parties, share this content. The whole reason of us doing this is to help somebody, and we don't know who we're going to be able to help, right? So there's no harm if people don't want to watch it. They don't have to. But could you imagine if we help one person, how valuable that was? So without further ado, welcome, Julie. Hey, hey, hey.
Well, I just have to say one thing. It's so interesting that the name of your program is Heal with Gold, because if I have friends that are watching, they know that I'm a jewelry addict. So
so they're going to find it. That's the right place for Julie to be.
That is the right place. So my first piece of advice to people is, buy lots of bling and maybe lots of ice cream. I don't know. Those are the two. Those are my two big. And get a dog. Dogs are wonderful.
I think you said it all. I think the show is
That's
over.
It. That's it. That's all you need to know. Jewelry, ice cream, and dogs. That's it.
Listen, I agree on all three. So let's go back lots of years.
Okay.
It's so funny because, guys, Julie's husband has a long beard, and I knew him before. I mean, he had a very short beard when I met him.
Right.
There has been such a change and an evolution. And when I see the pictures of the kids, our kids, I remember when I used to live on North 7th Avenue and you came.
Yeah.
You brought the baby, and she had the muscle issues, and I remember all of that. And then our paths diverged when you stayed in Highland Park, New Jersey, and I moved to Florida. But we did still keep in touch, and I didn't keep in touch with that many people, but I did keep in touch with you. And I think that we always understood each other. I think that we have a lot of similar traits when it comes to maybe a lack of patience for true stupidity. I think you have that. I have that. Like, come on, you can do better. So we have love for our families, obviously, but pets also. Julie, tell me about the cancer? Do you want to start
Sure.
at
Well,
the
I'll
cancer?
start chronologically.
How did you find out you had cancer?
So it was 1991 when I started having symptoms. I was 31 years old, working as the head nurse of a pediatric floor of a community hospital in Somerville, New Jersey. And I was in law school at night. I wanted to be a nurse.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I was at Seton Hall Law School. I wanted to be a nurse lawyer.
Oh,
That was like
wow.
my plan B because plan A hadn't materialized. Plan A being the nice Jewish doctor that took his time finding me. So, so I had had back pain for a while, for probably about 6 months, and had run the gamut from a family doctor to a chiropractor. And then I started having some other, and it was excruciating back pain, excruciating, like nothing I'd ever felt before, kind of in my mid back. And then I started having this absolutely bizarre sensation. When I laid down, I could feel and hear the blood kind of rushing through my chest. I'll touch on that in a minute. So I kept going to the doctor and I kept calling in sick to work. And I went to my doctor and told him, now, the pain is still here. And now I have this bizarre sensation. And I think I'm wheezing a little bit too. So he, of course, thinks let me just say it the way it was. He totally gaslit me and gaslighted, however you say it, and sent me to a psychiatrist, thinking that I was having or wanted me to see a psychiatrist. I don't think I ever went. Wanting me to research the stress in my life and, was this panic attacks and how to treat it if it was, et cetera. And my husband, well, I was just dating him at the time. He was a resident in family practice at the hospital where I worked. That was how we met. And one day he said to me, "This is crazy. You need a chest x-ray and you need some blood work." So I went back to the doctor and I said, "Elliot says I need a chest x-ray and blood work." And we did the blood work and we did the chest x-ray, and I went home, and maybe a half an hour later after I got home, the physician, the one that had gaslighted me, called me and said, "You need to come back in for a CAT scan now." And in that instant, I knew. I just knew. So it turned out that I really was feeling the blood rushing through my chest in a funny way. I had a huge a huge mass in the middle of my chest, wrapped around my aorta. So when I laid down, the pressure gradient changed, because when you lay down, your blood pressure changes. And I actually was literally feeling the turbulent blood flow through my chest. And they told me, the radiologist told me I was lucky that I hadn't thrown a huge clot from, the impingement of this huge tumor. And then so I was immediately hooked up with a very good oncologist. And over the next month, I was staged. I had every type of scan known to man. And we discovered that the pain that I was feeling was bone lesions, bone metastases in my thoracic spine. I have 3 vertebrae that were on the verge of being destroyed, and many lymph nodes, above the waist. I don't think I had any in my pelvic area, but they were all throughout my abdomen and above. And of course, this huge mass in the chest, which is very common with lymphoma, with any kind of lymphoma, a huge mass that doesn't get diagnosed right away, because you can really accommodate, you have a lot of space in there. Your lungs can kind of get squished and you might not notice for a while, but apparently I was beginning to notice. So I then started, about a month later, I started on 8 months of chemotherapy. It was a 2-week cycle where I would have chemo one week, be off the next week, and have chemo the next week. And I think, it's amazing that I don't remember this. I think I I think it was either 2 or 3 days a week on the on week, and then I'd be off for a week and then another 2 or 3 days. And that went on for 8 months. And that was rough. We got married. My husband had proposed by the time I was diagnosed, and we got married in the middle of my chemotherapy.
That's incredible.
That's a whole other chapter. Yeah. So, I really lucked out that he stuck by me, and his family also was extremely supportive, very supportive all throughout. He comes from a family of physicians, so everybody was knowledgeable and encouraging and, always there to speak to. And we didn't live in the same state, but they were very helpful. I don't have that much family myself. It's just at that time, it was just my brother and my father. My mother had passed away a few years earlier, and my father was just not in a position to be supportive mentally. But I had friends and family, other family. My brother, I have a cousin that I'm very close to they weren't there with me, but they were very supportive. I think I was really carried along by the community I lived in and the friends I had made in the community that my husband brought me into. And I had taken a leave of absence from work. My doctor had said, you can't work. You can't be exposed to I was a pediatric nurse, can't be exposed to all those illnesses, and you just can't work and do chemo at the same time. She felt it would be just too intense for me. So after the 8 months were over, I needed some radiation to my spine. And when I got to Sloan Kettering, which is the big place where everybody went to at that time for radiation, they blew me out of the water by saying my whole body needed to be radiated. And I thought I was just going to get a few little zaps to my spine, maybe a week, 10 days, and I'd be done. And they said, oh no, we're doing 8 weeks and it's every day, which was to go. So I commuted. My husband was a resident and on call every third night. I commuted into Manhattan for 8 weeks. Well, actually, I did 4 weeks, and then I got a horrible case of shingles because I was immunosuppressed. And at that point, they said, you can't be on the bus or the train anymore. So I had to find people to drive me or drive in with me. And that was a big deal because I really wasn't well enough to do it myself. Just getting into Manhattan from New Jersey was a nightmare.
On a good day is hard.
On a good day, it's a nightmare. So, but I did it, and I finished that out. And I went back to work. After about a year. I went back to work. I returned not to my former position. They had already hired somebody into that with my blessing. I went back to the newborn nursery because everybody felt that would be a safe place for somebody who's immunocompromised. And almost right away, I knew that I couldn't handle it. First of all, there was this conundrum, or I don't know what the word is, obstacle of me being very, very concerned about whether or not I would be able to bear my own children, because that was a huge issue for me. And it was uncertain at that time. And I also had a really major case of chemo brain. Chemotherapy can affect your cognition. And I remember standing over a baby in the nursery who needed, I don't know, some blood drawn or something from an umbilical line. And there were stopcocks, and you had to turn something one way and turn another way and put the syringe on and flush it and draw. And I froze. And I knew in that instant that if I went ahead and did the procedure, that there was a good potential that I would harm the baby. And I just stopped and called a colleague over and said, can you do this, please? And I'm pretty sure that was the last day that I worked, or I'm pretty sure I left very soon after that. I just knew I wasn't safe because I didn't have the same skill level that I'd had before chemo. It was just too soon. And so I stopped working, and we were looking into adopting. and I was
Were
undergoing some.
were you looking into adopting before giving it enough time to
um, so I went for a workup with an infertility specialist, and this guy told me that I would not have children of my own and that I should put my efforts, my money and my efforts into adopting.
Interesting.
So that's what we did. We started communicating with a local service. It was Jewish Family Services that can help with that type of thing. And a couple months later, my husband said to me, "I think you're pregnant. I think you should do a pregnancy test." And I said, "No, can't be. Not possible." So we were in the middle of a snowstorm. There was like 18 inches of snow on the ground. And he said, "I'm going to go to the drugstore and get a pregnancy test." And back then, pregnancy tests were like $15 each. And we didn't have the money. And I said, "Don't do it. Don't do it. It's $15 that you're going to throw down the drain. 30 if you get a double kit." And sure enough, I was pregnant with my son,
Wow.
who arrived a little bit early in August of the next year. And of course, during the delivery, I was screaming and telling my husband that I would never do this again. This is it. He gets one kid. We're done. And within like 3 weeks, I couldn't wait to do it again. And I got pregnant again very quickly. And I had had a little bit of hormonal treatment, but really nothing to get pregnant with my second child. I think I took some injections and had some serial ultrasounds to know when I was ovulating. But then I got pregnant with Eliza, who my Eliza and your Yael were buddies for a while.
Yes.
So, and then Eliza came along. And then I had 3 miscarriages. I have to tell you, quite honestly, none of my miscarriages were that big a deal for me. One of them was physically very traumatic. I bled. I really hemorrhaged. And that was physically traumatic. But mentally, I felt like I've come so far. I have a son and a daughter. There are so many people that would love to be in my position and aren't. I know that many, many people mourn miscarriages and pregnancy losses, and it just wasn't a big deal for me. That was one thing that I
But
hope.
maybe because you are a nurse and you also understand the medical
Right,
background to
right,
understand that it wasn't a viable baby.
right. And I also knew that if I could conceive, chances were good I could carry a pregnancy through. It was
Mhm.
just, bad luck or something. And then I did eventually. I had a third miscarriage, and literally 5 weeks later got pregnant with our youngest child. So that was a nightmare. We call it my near-death pregnancy. So my first 2 pregnancies medically were very simple. I think I had MRIs to follow my cancer, because that you can do MRIs and ultrasounds without any danger to the baby. CAT scans are another thing, which was what they would have preferred to do, but there wasn't any reason to do them. I didn't have any symptoms. And I had very low-tech pregnancies. I used family doctors for both of my deliveries. And
Really?
yep, yep.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't even have with my daughter, my second child, I didn't even have an IV until uh, I delivered her, hemorrhaged, and looked up at my husband and said, "Can you pass out when you're laying down?" And he said, "Yes, why?" And I said, "Goodbye." That was it. I was out. And I woke up with an IV in each arm. I didn't need blood, but I came very close. But that was easy. The third pregnancy that I sustained was just a nightmare. We don't know why, but I developed some sort of a vasculitis in my lungs, and I started at week 22 or 23. I went into preterm labor because I could not stop coughing, and I coughed up blood night and day. They had me on, I don't know how many medications. I was on massive doses of steroids. I was in the hospital more than I was home. which was incredibly traumatic for my little ones. My son was 4, my daughter was 3. It was very hard for them. It was hard for my husband too, but
For sure.
he's a real trooper. He picked up the slack, but that was a tough pregnancy. I said all along during that pregnancy that I felt more like I was dying than I did when I had cancer because of how sick I was. I'm sure you can relate to that because we know how your pregnancies were too.
Yeah, I had a hyperemesis with all
Yes.
babies, and I
Yes.
was in bed with all
Right.
of them between 7 and 8 months dying, feeling like I
Yeah.
was dying.
Yeah. I remember that because I think that's when I cooked for you. I think that's
Yes.
when I started cooking for you. So you said that you used to put a towel under the door so that you wouldn't smell the food coming in, and you would hide in your bedroom because that was what you had to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that pregnancy was just horrendous. And of course, being on high doses of steroids for months and months and months, I ended up with gestational diabetes. Steroids can cause your blood sugars to go sky high.
Mhm.
I ended up on insulin. And then I had a steroid-induced Cushing syndrome, which is a whole other diagnosis. I came out of that pregnancy not even really being able to walk. I would scoot on the floor, and I lived in a 3-story house, and the kids' bedroom was in the attic, in a finished attic. So I would go up there, like when everybody was ready for bed. My husband would bring the baby up, and all 4 of us, me, the 2 kids, and the baby, would be on 2 twin mattresses on the floor, sleeping. And then I would go downstairs in the morning, and I would go down on my bottom like a kid would. It was tough. I had some household help. We couldn't really afford it, but we did it anyway. And people from our synagogue came, brought me breakfast every day, and took my little ones to the nursery school. And then I had somebody come in almost every day to help with the baby. And my husband got up with her at night. I wasn't able to breastfeed. I didn't produce 1 drop of milk. A funny story about that. When I was in the hospital recovering from the birth, I was there for about 5 days. And she was in the NICU just for about a week. She had a great birth weight. At 32 weeks, she came out weighing over 5 pounds. She did better than I did. And I was pumping around the clock to try because she was a preemie. And everybody said, even though her weight is good, she's a preemie and her digestive system is probably, a little wonky. And you should really try and produce milk for her. Nothing doing. And the lactation consultant came into my room on my last day. I'll never forget this. She said, "Mrs. Kuznets, women nurse their babies in the concentration camps. I have no idea why you can't." It was absolutely horrible. It devastated me. And
You see the power of like a few words can
right.
destroy a person. Look how many years
Yes.
later you remember those.
Yes. I went through so much afterwards because I was bottle feeding, and there was all this shame and embarrassment. And it was awful. It was awful. She thrived. She did great. All my kids are, college graduates, and they're all bright. But yeah, it was my dog is making noise. It was a horrible, horrible thing to say. And I was just too sick. I was too sick to breastfeed. So things were relatively calm for a few years. And then when my kids got to grade school, they started bringing home every germ known to man. And I would get pneumonia once or twice a year and end up, a couple times I ended up in the hospital, on steroids more often than not. My girls were always very clingy, very, I think my chronic illnesses started to affect them when they were very young. And I started having a lot of joint pain. I went to see a rheumatologist who put me on one of those, we call them biologics. And I ended up twice with meningitis from being on them, aseptic meningitis. So that was another big thing. They were about 2 episodes about a year apart. And that was, another, me being away from my kids in the hospital and them being traumatized. And when is mommy coming home? And, it was tough. There were tough years in there. There really were. And then I hit a period when my kids were older in high school where I think my health was better. I wasn't getting sick as often. I actually started working again. I worked a little bit for a nursing agency, a home care agency, and I started working at my kids' school. There was a boys' campus and a girls' campus, and I worked in both places for a number of years, part-time for probably about 8 years. I worked for my husband for a while when he was in charge of the occupational health department at the hospital that we met at. He had to fire somebody unexpectedly, and my 3-year-old wasn't toilet trained yet. And he said, well, put her in underwear and send her to school. That's it. We're done. I need you. So that's what we did. We went to Toys R Us. We bought princess underwear. We sent her to school. And she rose to the occasion and was toilet trained. And life was, there were, when you have kids, you have kids, problems come up with the kids, and, you're dealing with things. Things were relatively calm until our youngest was 14, and then she was diagnosed with a serious illness. And that really took a lot of energy on both our parts, on the whole family. Well, my one daughter was in seminary at that point, or high school and then seminary, and my son was away at high school. He went to a boarding school, but that was another big hurdle to get through. And, the pain of seeing your child ill it's awful. It's awful. It was far worse than anything I went through. It was far worse. And we managed to get through it and get her through high school and into college. She actually graduated last week. Yay. Mm-hmm. And about halfway through her college career, my one daughter was married with a baby, and my son had moved to Israel a long time before this. And my daughter that lived in Israel really needed help. She had a little baby and she was working full time. And we had always planned on moving to Israel, but my husband wasn't really ready to retire. But we said, let's put the house up for sale and see what happens. So we painted the house and we put it up for sale, and we got an offer on it the next day.
Wow. And I know that house.
So that offer actually fell through. But we got another offer a few months later, and that offer went through. So we had about 6 months to prepare for moving to Israel. So that's, 30 years worth of belongings and connections. And we came to Israel in the middle of COVID, which was interesting. And it was really, really hard for me. I left, my friends and my family of 60 years. I was 60 years old when we moved. To move when you're 60, let alone to a foreign country with a completely different culture and language, it was very, very hard. Even though I was thrilled to be near my 2 kids. My daughter had moved years before. I had a grandson here, and my son hadn't lived in our home for, I guess, about 7 years by the time we moved, and I really missed him. So I was thrilled to be here, but it was a huge, huge transition for me. And at about the time that we moved, I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. I was diagnosed at stage 3. And since then, it's just been a battle. I have diabetes again, or still, or I don't know. We can't really figure that out. I had gestational diabetes. When I was pregnant, my blood sugars were high for years, but never in the diabetic range. And now I'm a full-fledged diabetic with chronic kidney disease. And then
you need to talk to my husband.
Yeah.
We definitely do, because He had stage 3 kidney disease
Oh,
from everything that he went through.
right. Mhm.
His doctor really scared him. He said, "One more stage and you're in
Right.
dialysis."
Right.
So
Right.
we went to a natural doctor because my husband refused to add more medications to whatever he was already taking. And he completely reverted kidney disease through with his help. Um, and and also even the diabetes, he after his surgery, the diabetes went away, but his sugars were still a little high. And thank God they are much better now. He changed his diet and the supplements that he takes, and he is doing better. And you have
Well,
nothing to lose, it's
we've played a lot with medications, especially because as my kidney failure worsened, my medications had to change. Like, there are certain medications that you can't be on.
natural.
Um, and that kind of brought us to that I've had more physical pain. And I always had aches and pains in my joints since I had chemo, but I started having a lot more pain. And I went to a rheumatologist, and I was just recently diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And I'm currently, just 3 weeks ago, I started a horrible bout with my spine. It's mostly in my neck and down my spine. So that's been a big thing, because what can't you take when you have kidney disease? You can't take nonsteroidals. You can't take any ibuprofen, even aspirin. You can only take in limited. Tylenol is really it, or narcotics. And who wants to be on narcotics?
Mhm.
There's danger there. So I've found that my doctors have actually been extremely conservative in treating me, which I appreciate. No one has very conservative, and I've been very fortunate that in Israel I have found amazing doctors. My Rory, you're going to have to wait. My nephrologist,
Mhm.
it was actually Cleveland Clinic trained,
Mm.
and I just love them, and I have good doctors here, so I feel like I'm getting good guidance, but it would be nice to know what has caused all these issues, but everybody just kind of throws up their hands and said you had a lot of chemo and radiation. And we know that we know one of the drugs damaged my lungs. We know the radiation caused cardiac issues. These are all like expected long-term outcomes. And they tell you about this when you're going through it, and you have to sign the consent that says kidney failure, heart disease, possible. But
You have no option.
you have no option, right? And here I am 30 years later. Oh, I forgot about my breast cancer. Oh, imagine that. Okay. So 10 years
I
after
was
my
going
lymphoma.
I was going to ask you, when did the
Yeah,
breast
oh, I
cancer?
did that. It must be because I'm tired. Okay, so my lymphoma was 1991, and actually it was 2002 I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which is also a known. Solid tumors are a known side effect of chemo and radiation. So I was very young. I was 42. There was no history in my family, and they said it was from the radiation, without which I probably wouldn't have been alive. But so that ended up, more surgeries, and I had bilateral mastectomies. I had 6 more months of chemo, um, and reconstruction about a year later. So that was a whole other time period
So
to get through.
I want to ask you about the emotional aspect of going through so much illness, because you know that okay, so I had 4 difficult pregnancies. I almost died with my youngest. Um, I did have ovarian cysts, and I had to take my ovaries out. I had quite a bunch of surgeries. So I know pain in that regard, but at the same time they all came. It was a certain period of time, and then I was able
Right.
to recover. I think that prolonged pain, prolonged suffering takes much more than a physical toll on the person. Yes, you have the physical aspect of it, but then you have the emotional aspect of always living feeling sick, not knowing when is this going to ever be over. And I think that it breaks most people to a point where they even question, does it even make sense for me to be here? Many people say they don't want to live here. They make those choices. Um,
I
you
think what you're talking about is uncertainty, the uncertainty.
it's the uncertainty, and it's the prolonged like the physical pain itself, how it affects the psyche. I mean, you need
Yes.
strength to cope with physical pain. So the more rested you are, the more you have the energy to cope with that pain. But when it's prolonged pain, you're depleted. You don't have from where to take that strength. So how did you deal with the prolonged pain and
I
the
will tell
emotional
you,
aspect?
one day at a time, one day at a time, sometimes, a couple of hours at a time. And and I was not afraid to ask for help. And I asked for help all the time. And I had friends that pitched in even when they weren't asked. There were times when I wouldn't ask for help because my kids, maybe didn't want somebody in the house, or they wanted my food that I cooked because, I might make the chicken nuggets a different way than my next door neighbor.
Mhm.
Um, One day at a time. That's always been my motto. The other thing is that I never looked at any of this. This is going to sound a little strange, but people like to say, or some people like to say, that cancer is a gift. It's not a gift. Um, I never looked at it that way. I was angry, and I think that anger gave me some perseverance. I asked God to give me children. What was I going to do? Like lay in bed? That was it. I had 3 kids. I didn't have a choice really, um, but I let myself have a certain amount of anger. Uh, there, there was a really, really hard time initially, right after I stopped chemo and radiation, and this was when I knew that I had chemo brain. And when you're doing something, when you're getting chemo, when you're doing radiation, you're doing something, you're fighting it,
Yeah.
and
I
then
Hold on a
all of a
second.
sudden,
Before you go into that,
okay,
this was something that we spoke behind the scenes just before the show began. I read a book that I recommend to anybody who's going through, especially cancer. It's called A Bridge Between Two Kingdoms. And I'm going to put in the group. I have to find the book. I'll take a picture and I'll put a picture inside our Heal with Gold group. It was a phenomenal book. And it's the story of this young girl, 20 something, who had cancer. She had leukemia. And the first half of the book, it's the whole story of her cancer. And then the second part of the book is her coming back into society, in the world of the living, figuring out how to re-enter after going through the trauma, the losses. She lost friends who used to sit and have chemo the same days that she had chemo, and she became friends with these people, and she saw many of them die. And just to get adjusted, just like you were going to start talking about, you had a routine that suddenly was taken away from you, and
right,
while that routine was taken away from you, you didn't have the strength and energy to get into the regular world of
yeah, yeah,
humans, right?
yeah. It was tough. It was tough. That those first 6 months afterwards were really hard, and I fortunately for me, I got pregnant with my son right away, and the next year I was busy, 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 but that was a really tough time. You're just so scared. It's funny. I hear this new phrase recently that just makes me kind of smile. People like to say they're cancer free to describe being in remission or being cured or having it all cut out, or ringing the bell after their chemo. You're never free of cancer. You're never free of it. It's always there. It's always there. I mean, I am 21 years out from my breast cancer, and my husband just this year lost two sisters to breast cancer. It's there. It's there in my mind. I started having this back pain, and of course, my head went to, oh, it's probably metastatic disease. Breast cancer can be a very, very sneaky disease, and it can come back many years later. A lot of cancers actually do that. And it's just always there. It gets into every part of your life. It affected my relationship with my kids. It can affect your marriage if you're not really careful. It takes work. It takes work. And when you're in that place where you're in between, that was tough. It was tough. That was a really tough time. Yeah.
How did you seek therapy or family, or how did
Well,
you manage
so
to?
I was on antidepressants all throughout. I mean, I don't think I've ever not been on them. If you've been through as much as I've been through, you'd be depressed too. And my doctors have changed. At one point, I was on a medication for a long time that I just didn't think was effective anymore. It was very hard to wean off of it, but I had a good doctor who got me off of it and onto something. And actually, about a year ago, I was able to. I've been on two different medications for many years, and about a year ago, I was able to cut both doses in half, and I feel pretty good. Emotionally, there have been. It's hard. I think that it's hard dealing with aging and feeling like I'm just not the person that I used to be physically. I can't. I use a cane sometimes. Like, I don't recognize myself, but it's actually helpful, and it keeps people away from me on the buses. You hold out your cane and say, "Get away," because in Israel, people can be very pushy. Public transportation is quite hazardous here. So that's been hard for me. That's been very, very hard for me. That's like first and foremost in my mind recently. But I just tell myself the same things I used to tell myself, one day at a time, one day at a time. And I thank God I have a husband who is gold. He really is. And I've always had that. So I've really been incredibly fortunate. As many bad things that have happened to me, I've had an equal amount of blessings in my life.
And I think that I'm very much like that. I have my share, but I tend to look for the blessings. And actually, in 2 weeks, we have a speaker, Fally Klein. She's amazing. I did already 2 interviews with her. I'll do a third in 2 weeks. And I always share with her what I call the miracles in my life, because I see miracles in my life, and I think we all have them.
Yes.
It happens
Yes.
to all of us.
Yes.
It's just that a lot of things we take for granted. But if we stop and we say, no, this is not something that should be happening, and it's happening, and it's so wonderful, and you focus on that, I think it balances out a lot of the adversity that we go through.
I agree. I agree.
Right? When we what you just said, that I have an equal amount of blessings, I think it's because you notice them. You're not saying, okay, I'm going to live my life just thinking about my pain and deal with them, but you were also awake and looking for those blessings.
I do. There are times when I feel very sorry for myself, and I have a good friend that I don't know if you're watching, my friend who knows
Mhm.
who she is. She
Mhm.
said she might sign in. I'm not sure if she's there or not, but she
Mhm.
has a lot of physical illnesses and challenges too. And I call her up and I say, I need a pity party for a few minutes here. But I've never seen myself, at least I've tried not to see myself as a victim
Mhm.
and say, why me? I don't know. I've never really felt a pull to that. Why me?
Mhm.
It's hard not to do that when you're in physical pain. Physical pain is my one big obstacle that I haven't overcome yet. Like I just can't be in pain. I can't tolerate pain. Yet I
Right.
have I can't tolerate it mentally, yet I have a very high pain tolerance. It's bizarre, but I do not like to be in pain. Not that anybody likes it, but I don't do well. I don't do well with pain.
Yeah, that's what we said before, that I think you were also exhausted. You had so much of it that it comes to a point like,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
bag is full. I've had it. I put in my time.
right.
I
I'm
don't
done.
want
I'm
it
done.
anymore. I want to
Right.
talk. I want to talk very quickly, and we're not going to go into any great detail, but I wanted to touch with you because I know some of your personal story when it comes to raising children and having children that go through a hard time for whatever. You had a child with an illness. You had a child that chose a path different than yours. Um,
And
yet
two of those.
2 of
Yeah.
those. That's right,
Yeah.
2 of those. Yet, those kids are blessings. You prayed so much to have them. I think that the raising children is such a dichotomy of feelings. I mean, we love them so much. It is such a crazy kind of a love because we love them when they're born. They didn't do anything to deserve the love. Just like they were born, they
Right.
poop, they cry, they
Right. Right.
help
Right.
the whole time. Like they haven't done anything to deserve that love, but it's such an automatic feeling, and we love throughout their lives, and yet they can cause us pain. I think that a lot of people deal with the disappointments of our expectations of our children. We always want our children to be better than us, meaning, so we know our path, we know what's good for us, we don't attain it fully. We want our kids to keep going, take us to the next level through them and live a life that's holier or better or more ethical or more successful, whatever. Each parent has their own um, dreams for their children. You, at the same time, you prayed so much to have a kid. You didn't even think you would be able to have this kid. And then you go through all of this process, and then there is the combination of those disappointments. At the same time, you're dealing with health issues. How do you deal with that?
So, I haven't yet mastered some of that. I think we're always growing and learning. We've had my husband and I have had some particular challenges in the past few years with our children. I think I've come to the point where I've told myself that I have to accept what I can't accept. It kind of radical acceptance. We were once told by a very, very good psychologist that by the time your kids are 15 or 16, you've really lost all control. Like they're fully formed human beings pretty much, and you've lost control. Uh, I'm happy, and I don't mean this to sound like I have a low bar. In this day and age, with the world as crazy and horrible and dangerous as it is, I am thrilled that all three of my children are functioning, well functioning, members of society that have good relationships with peers and work, and they're kind, good-hearted people, and that they're not strung out on drugs or alcoholics. Or I consider myself incredibly fortunate in that regard. And the rest of it, how they choose to live their life, they have their lives and we have ours. And I don't know that the two necessarily can mesh. I would, there's one child that I would like to have a better relationship with. I think we're getting there. It's been slow and painful for both of us, but I think things are improving. It's not easy. I think by far and above, parenting has been the hardest thing I've done in my life.
And that's what I wanted to bring to the conversation, because I think that people don't speak very openly about the pains that parents feel from the hurt of parenting, because parenting is supposed to be such a gift. So many people
Right.
cannot have children, so we can't even feel like, oh, I can't complain, right? Because we got this blessing of having a child.
And
And
then you see the families that seem to have what I call the charmed life, that have never had an issue. They never got a call from the principal. Their kid was never bullied. All their kids did great in school. And you think, what did I do wrong?
yeah,
It's hard. It's hard not to compare.
yes.
But
So I want to tell you a few things because I have put so much thought into this, and eventually one day I'm going to do a show about it.
I
Um,
think you should write a book. I think you
yeah,
should write
well, I started my second book, and it has to do with this. So
good.
yes, you're in the right track.
Good.
But I think that we define ourselves, we define our purpose as mothers. Our hoping, yeah, we can have a profession, and we have friends, and we have our, our parents, we have siblings, we have that family, and we have what we do every single day, and we're spouses. But I think that ultimately we're mothers, those who are mothers. And it doesn't have to be a biological mother. If you have a child that you adopted, the surrogate, it doesn't matter. You're
Yeah.
raising somebody, right? I think that we define ourselves as mothers, and the success of this job is what we portray
Right.
that our children's life should be.
Should
And
be.
if it's not, then we failed. And I came to the conclusion that we're all mature souls. Our children, our babies, our newborns, inside of them, they have their soul. It's a soul just like my soul, right? There's no adult soul, baby soul. It's this baby. It's this human has a soul. I have a soul. This soul is given to us for a time, for a purpose, and we have what to give them. They have what to gift us. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this soul has the trajectory of their lives that they have to go through, that it's apart from us. And that's why I say it's a temporary thing. Yes, your doctor said at 15, maybe 18. I don't know. I want to believe that we have a little bit more time, but at the end of the day, we are just two mature souls that have a connection, because in this life we're connected by parent-child relationship. In the next life, it could be the opposite.
Right.
And we cannot judge our success when that soul has its own journey
Purpose.
to
Right.
live, and purpose, and reason for being. We don't know the calculations from their previous lives. I believe in all of that. I don't know. Maybe there is some viewers here that think that I'm a complete cuckoo. It's okay. You can think that, but I do believe in souls, and in us coming back and fixing tikkun, right? In Hebrew, you say tikkun is like fixing the soul and correcting. So there's a reason for this. This is just a temporary job that we're given, but we judge who we are based on what we think our children should end up being, doing.
Right.
And I think that if we understood a little bit more about what our job really is, and what their purpose, that they have a separate purpose from us,
Yeah.
we would
Right.
we would be a little bit easier on ourselves.
I have a friend who likes to say that your biggest role as a parent is to put yourself out of business.
Yeah.
To raise your kids to be independent, happy, healthy human beings. And in a way, it's true. There's that separation that you go through many stages of separation when you're raising children, but that separation into adulthood, I don't know that anyone can really prepare for that. I think until you're there and you feel it, it's really hard. I know my girls always say to me, my son not so much because he's very independent, but my girls always say to me, I don't want you to fix things. I just want you to listen to me and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that happened, or that sucks, that I don't want you to necessarily fix it. And I'm in there trying to, okay, what can we do? Can we do A, B, C, D? Have you tried that? Have you tried this? And they tell me, just stop, Ima, don't do that. And it's been very hard for me to pull back with that. It's just my nature. Also, I'm a nurse. Nurses fix things. And what you said about identity as a parent, like I've always had that dichotomy. I've always felt very strongly that, like, even though I haven't worked in a hospital in years and years and years, during COVID, as sick as I have been on and off during COVID, I felt like I want to do more. Like the world is dying and I'm sitting here on the sofa in Israel with my dog doing nothing. It was really hard for me because part of my identity has always been as a medical person. So I've given that up, kind of giving up the parenting role. Now I'm easing into the grandparenting role, which a little bit about too. My grandson is just the love of my life now. And that's good. That's good. There are good things, but life.
Yeah, we need to give ourselves a break. I find it always fascinating how we are so easygoing with our friends, right? We tell them it's okay, it's fine, you can pick yourself up, you didn't do anything bad, but we're so judgmental of ourselves.
Oh, it's true. I have friends whose kids have gone through similar experiences as mine, choosing a different path. And I adore their kids and I understand them and I'm able to be like approving of them. But then it comes to my own issues with my own kids and that same acceptance isn't there, which is why I said, I'm trying to accept that I can't accept some things and find a way to move on from that without torturing myself with that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
issue.
I think that if our children don't end up exactly like what we expected for them, wanted, hoped for them, prayed for them, raised them to be, we feel like failures. So it is, we get upset with our children because our children are telling us you failed
Right.
because I'm not doing what you wanted me to do. But our kids' friends, no, you didn't have any expectations for them. So if they're nice humans, you were already approving and accepting and loving of them. Because
Right.
nothing that they do reflects poorly on you. But we feel like
Oh,
our children
oh yeah.
don't
Oh
do
yeah.
what we want them to do. It reflects on us. But I think it's a self-imposed
Oh yeah.
thing.
Absolutely. You take everything very personally. Yeah. As a parent, I think. I don't know. I don't think there's a way. I think you have to train yourself not to do that.
Yeah.
It's a very conscious thing. There's one thing I wanted to mention because you mentioned a book before. I know we're running out of time. So throughout my life, I've always been involved with. I started out my career actually working for a pediatric hospice, and I've always been involved with other people that have had cancer when they died, when they were dying, before, after. And there's a book that I recommend that absolutely everyone should read because let's face it, none of us get out of here alive, right? That's, you can't, there's two sayings, you can't take your money with you and none of us get out of here alive. So it's a book by a palliative care physician called Ira Byock. He actually has a bunch of good books out, but Byock. And the book is called The Best Care Possible. And it's about making decisions through cancer care and at end of life as well. But for anyone that experiences a challenge with cancer, it's an incredible book, full of a lot of really amazing guidance. He has other books out that are also very good, but that's the one that I think everyone should read because we're all going to have either aging parents or we're going to hopefully age ourselves. And we're not prepared. We don't think about death. We don't talk about death. it's just something in general that people avoid. So as a nurse, as a person that's had cancer, that's something I try to push this book on everybody. You can get it on Amazon. The Best Care Possible, Ira Byock.
Fantastic.
Indeed.
Julie, I want to thank you for waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I actually never went to sleep.
Oh my goodness.
I ate ice cream and I watched, I was binge watching a show on Amazon.
Okay, so you did listen. It probably played with your dog.
So now I will walk the dog and we'll both go to sleep for a while.
So I want to thank you because I do sincerely appreciate this effort, because I know, I really know that when I do shows, so many, you reached out to me. I would love to share my story. The way it always happens is because somebody needs to listen to your story. I really believe that every single show that I do, it has a reason. And so somebody is going to be watching this show and you're going to inspire them in some way, empower them to do something, to feel a certain way, to seek out help. We didn't talk about the difficulty that it is to ask for help, but this is a topic in itself. I always say it's always easier to be on the giving side, right? It's easy. It's good to give. You feel good to be the giver. And when I had to, but when my husband was sick and I needed help, and I'm also usually on the giving side, and I had to learn that being the receiver is also being a giver.
Yes.
When you receive, you're giving somebody else the opportunity to give, right? So if we just change the perspective of the situation, we can see things differently and accept our new situation. But I really believe that this show is going to impact somebody's life for the better.
And if anybody wants to contact me, you can put them in touch with me.
Fantastic. So we'll do that for support, for knowledge. And I ask everybody, please share the show, because you don't know, maybe a friend of yours is going through this struggle. Maybe somebody just got a diagnosis. And it's amazing to see somebody 20, 30 years post-cancer with a life, with children, with a grandchild, moving to a country that it's difficult, but it was a dream. I mean, things are possible. There is life.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, it's hard. We hear a lot of tragic stories, and it is good to know that not every story is like that.
That's right.
Okay.
Good night. Guys, goodbye. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks with Fally Klein. Tune in, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
See you soon.